Behind closed doors in Washington, career diplomats are asking a question that should terrify you. What happens on day two? Because if Trump's own statements are accurate, America just inherited responsibility for 28 million people with no clear plan. When you watched President Trump's press conference from Mar-a-Lago yesterday, announcing that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had been captured and that the United States would now run Venezuela during a transition period, you might have focused on the audacity of the moment, the sheer boldness of extracting a head of state from his own country and declaring American administrative control over a sovereign nation. But if you stop there, you're missing the story that should keep every American awake tonight. This isn't just about one dramatic military operation or one autocratic leader finally facing justice. This is about the United States government taking on an obligation it has repeatedly failed to fulfill in the past, with consequences that ripple far beyond Venezuela's borders. We're looking at a commitment that could define American foreign policy for the next decade, made apparently without the institutional preparation that such a massive undertaking requires. The immediate comparison that foreign policy experts are making isn't to successful interventions, because there aren't many to choose from. They're pointing to Iraq in 2003, Afghanistan in 2001, and Libya in 2011. These are cautionary tales, not success stories. In each case, the military operation was the easy part. Removing Saddam Hussein took 3 weeks. Toppling the Taliban took 2 months. Getting rid of Gaddafi took 7 months. But building functioning societies in their place took years, cost trillions of dollars, and in most cases ended in failure or chaos. According to multiple reports from inside the administration, there was no comprehensive day-after plan developed before this operation. The focus was entirely on the capture itself, which by all accounts was executed flawlessly. But governing a country of 28 million people, especially one that has been isolated from American diplomatic engagement for 5 years, requires more than military precision. It requires institutional knowledge, cultural understanding, economic expertise, and most critically, legitimacy in the eyes of the Venezuelan people. The United States closed its embassy in Caracas in 2019. Most American diplomats with deep Venezuela experience have been reassigned to other posts. The CIA's human intelligence network inside the country, while certainly present, was designed for surveillance and targeting operations, not for the complex task of civil administration. When Trump says his cabinet will run Venezuela, he's describing a remote-control governance model that has never worked anywhere in the world. Think about what this actually means in practical terms. Venezuela's economy collapsed years ago under Maduro's mismanagement. Inflation has rendered the currency nearly worthless. Basic services like electricity, water, and telecommunications are sporadic at best. The healthcare system is in shambles. The education system has been gutted. Criminal gangs control large swaths of territory. These aren't problems you solve with video calls from Washington or by sending in a team of American advisors for a few weeks. Legal analysts are raising additional concerns that go to the heart of international law. Venezuela isn't Iraq under UN sanctions or Afghanistan harboring terrorists. It's a sovereign nation whose government, however illegitimate, was recognized by several countries, including Russia and China. By declaring that America will govern Venezuela, even temporarily, Trump has crossed a line that exists for good reason. He's established a precedent that any country with sufficient military power can simply remove a government it doesn't like and install its own administration. The human cost of getting this wrong is staggering. Venezuela's humanitarian crisis has already driven over 7 million people from their homes, creating the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. If the post-Maduro transition fails, if the country descends into civil war or factional fighting, those numbers could double. And where do refugees from a failed American intervention in Venezuela go? Many of them head north, toward the same border that Trump has promised to militarize. Congressional sources are describing a mood of deep unease on Capitol Hill, and not just among Democrats. Republican senators who have spent years criticizing nation-building and forever wars are now confronted with their own party's president committing America to what could be the largest state-building project since Iraq. The Senate is expected to vote next week on a bipartisan war powers resolution that would require congressional approval for ongoing military operations in Venezuela, but Trump has already indicated he views the drug cartels as unlawful combatants. a designation that he argues gives him broad presidential war powers. The practical challenges start immediately. Who's going to secure Venezuela's oil infrastructure, which provides the majority of government revenue? How do you prevent the country's massive gold reserves from being looted during the transition? What happens to the thousands of Cuban advisors and Russian technicians who have been propping up Venezuela's military and intelligence services? Do they just fly home, or do they become insurgents? Trump mentioned during his press conference that he's been in contact with Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, who under Venezuelan law should assume the presidency. But Rodriguez was deeply implicated in the regime's corruption and human rights abuses. She's under U.S. sanctions herself. The idea that America would govern through her while Maduro sits in a federal detention center in Brooklyn creates a bizarre situation where the U.S. is simultaneously prosecuting the regime and working with its remnants. Maria Corina Machado, the legitimate opposition leader who won massive support in last year's election, has been noticeably absent from Trump's statements. According to sources familiar with the administration's thinking, there are concerns about her ability to command respect internationally, which raises the troubling possibility that America is planning to sideline the democratically chosen alternative to Maduro in favor of a more manageable transition figure. The economic dimension of this commitment is staggering. Iraq cost American taxpayers over $2 trillion. Afghanistan cost even more. Venezuela's infrastructure is in worse shape than either of those countries was before intervention. The electrical grid is failing. The oil industry, which should be the foundation of recovery, has been so mismanaged that production has fallen by 75% from its peak. Rebuilding Venezuela to the point where it can govern itself could easily cost hundreds of billions of dollars over many years. There's also the question of what running Venezuela actually means in practice. Does America now control Venezuelan military units? Are U.S. officials making decisions about Venezuelan domestic law? Who's responsible when Venezuelan civilians are killed by Venezuelan security forces that are now presumably under American command? These aren't abstract legal questions. They have immediate implications for American service members, American officials, and American legal liability. The intelligence community's assessment, according to sources familiar with recent briefings, is that Venezuela's collapse accelerated significantly in the months leading up to this operation. The social fabric that holds the country together has been severely damaged. Regional militias, criminal organizations, and paramilitary groups have filled the vacuum left by state failure. Simply removing Maduro doesn't eliminate these power centers, and it's unclear whether American forces have the legal authority or practical ability to disarm them. International reaction has been mixed in ways that complicate America's position. While European allies like France have welcomed Maduro's removal, they've been notably silent about Trump's declaration that America will govern Venezuela. The Organization of American States, which has been critical of Maduro for years, is struggling to endorse what looks like an old-fashioned imperial intervention. Brazil and Colombia, Venezuela's neighbors, are caught between relief at Maduro's departure and concern about American military forces operating permanently in their backyard. The timeline for this commitment is completely undefined. Trump spoke about running Venezuela for a period, but didn't specify whether that means weeks, months, or years. Historical precedent suggests that once America commits to governing a foreign country, extraction becomes politically and practically difficult. The mission expands, the timeline stretches, the costs multiply, and suddenly a quick intervention becomes a generational commitment. What makes this situation uniquely dangerous is the speed with which it's unfolding. There were years of planning before the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, extensive interagency processes, congressional hearings, public debate. Here we have a decision that appears to have been made by a small group of officials and implemented within hours. The apparatus of government is scrambling to catch up with commitments that have already been made in their name. The State Department, which would normally lead post-conflict reconstruction efforts, is operating with severely reduced capacity in Latin America after budget cuts and personnel changes. USAID, the agency responsible for development assistance, has been similarly hollowed out. The Pentagon, which excels at military operations, has a mixed record at best when it comes to civil administration. Yet these are the institutions that Trump is asking to govern a complex, failed state in America's backyard. For the Venezuelan people, who have suffered under Maduro's dictatorship for over a decade, this represents both hope and peril. Hope because Maduro's removal opens the possibility of democratic restoration and economic recovery. Peril because a botched American intervention could leave them worse off than they were under authoritarian rule. Libya offers a cautionary example of how quickly a humanitarian intervention can become a humanitarian disaster when there's no coherent plan for what comes next. The broader implications for American foreign policy are profound. Trump campaigned on ending America's foreign entanglements and bringing troops home. Yet here he is, committing America to its most extensive overseas governance project since Iraq. This contradiction isn't lost on his political base. Some of his most vocal supporters, including Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, have already criticized the operation as exactly the kind of foreign intervention they voted against. If this goes well, if Venezuela emerges as a stable, democratic, prosperous country under temporary American guidance, it could validate a more aggressive approach to removing hostile governments in America's sphere of influence. But if it goes badly, if Venezuela becomes another quagmire that drains American resources and produces limited results, it could discredit American intervention for a generation and leave Trump's political movement permanently associated with foreign policy failure. The question that should concern every American is whether our government has learned the lessons from previous nation-building efforts or whether we're about to repeat the same mistakes on an even larger scale. Because unlike Iraq, which is thousands of miles away, or Afghanistan, which is on the other side of the world, Venezuela is right here in the Western Hemisphere. Its failure directly affects American security, American immigration, and American economic interests. As we watch this story unfold over the coming weeks and months, the key indicators to watch aren't just the headlines about Maduro's trial or the immediate reactions from other world leaders. The real test will be whether America can build functioning institutions in Venezuela faster than the country falls apart, whether we can establish legitimacy with the Venezuelan people before they conclude that American governance is just another form of foreign domination, and whether we can extract ourselves successfully when the time comes, or whether Venezuela becomes another permanent American commitment with no clear end date. What happened yesterday in Caracas was the beginning of the story, not the end. And based on everything we know about how these operations typically unfold, the hardest chapters are still ahead.